Welcome back to The Hidden Lens. On May 23, 1934, the most famous criminal couple in America was gunned down on a Louisiana back road. You've seen the photos, Bonnie and Clyde's car riddled with 167 bullet holes, their bodies slumped inside. But here's what doesn't add up. If 6 lawmen fired 130 rounds at point-blank range into a trapped car, why do the autopsy reports show only 26 entrance wounds on Bonnie Parker and 25 on Clyde Barrow? Why were there only 107 spent shell casings recovered from a scene where 130-plus rounds were allegedly fired? And why did the Mortician wait 34 years to reveal that the bodies had been moved and repositioned before those iconic photographs were taken? The story America was told painted a dramatic picture. Two young outlaws, hopelessly in love, dying together in a hail of bullets. The climactic ambush that ended the most notorious crime spree of the Depression era. 6 brave lawmen finally bringing justice to cop killers who'd terrorized the Southwest for 2 years. The photographs that made it all real, the bullet-riddled death car, bodies twisted in their final moments, justice served at last. This became the definitive ending to the Bonnie and Clyde story, cemented in newspapers, books, and eventually Hollywood films. But when you examine the physical evidence with modern forensic techniques, those iconic images tell a very different story about what happened on that rural road outside Gibsland, Louisiana. Before we dive deeper into what the evidence reveals, I want to hear from you. Have you ever looked at a famous historical photograph and wondered what happened in the moments right before or after it was taken? What details do you notice that others might miss? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Some of you have incredibly sharp eyes for spotting inconsistencies. Let's establish who we're dealing with here. The hunted Bonnie Elizabeth Parker, 24 years old, an aspiring actress from Texas who would become the getaway driver for one of America's most wanted criminals. Clyde Chestnut Barrow, 25, a small-time car thief who'd escalated to bank robbery and murder. Together, they'd led the Barrow gang on a 2-year crime spree across the Southwest, allegedly killing 13 people, including multiple police officers. The hunters formed an equally formidable group. Frank Hamer, the legendary Texas Ranger, brought out of retirement specifically to track down Bonnie and Clyde. His partner Manny Galt, another seasoned lawman. From Louisiana came Sheriff's Deputy Henderson Jordan and Deputy Prentice Oakley. Texas contributed Deputy Bob Alcorn and Deputy Ted Hinton, notably the only members of the posse carrying cameras that day. The stakes couldn't have been higher. 13 murders attributed to the Barrow gang had made them public enemy number 1. But paradoxically, Bonnie and Clyde had also become folk heroes to Depression-era Americans who saw them as rebels against banks and authority. Law enforcement's reputation hung on bringing them in, and given the couple's history of shooting their way out of police encounters, preferably dead rather than alive. According to the official report filed that day, here's what happened on May 23, 1934, at 9:15 a.m. on a rural road near Gibsland, Louisiana. The 6-man posse had been tracking Bonnie and Clyde for months, finally cornering them through information provided by a local informant named Henry Methan. As the couple's stolen tan Ford V8 sedan approached the ambush site, the lawmen opened fire from concealed positions in the woods alongside the road. The official account states the ambush lasted less than 2 minutes. When the shooting stopped, both outlaws were dead, killed instantly in the initial barrage of gunfire. Frank Hamer's report documented over 130 rounds fired by the 6 officers, with the car struck 167 times. The couple never had a chance to return fire or even attempt escape. Justice served. Case closed. The photographs taken that morning would cement this version of events in American memory, showing the aftermath of what appeared to be an overwhelming display of lawful force against dangerous criminals. But when forensic investigators began examining the evidence decades later, they discovered problems that cast serious doubt on this official narrative. The math simply doesn't work. 6 officers allegedly fired over 130 rounds, yet crime scene investigators recovered only 107 spent shell casings from the ambush site. Where are the other 23 or more shells? In a confined crime scene on an open road, ammunition evidence doesn't simply vanish. The autopsy results present an even more troubling contradiction. The death car shows 167 bullet holes, clear evidence of massive gunfire, but the combined autopsy reports for both Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow document only 51 total entrance wounds between them. If they were trapped inside a vehicle being shot to pieces from multiple directions, why do their bodies show so few hits? The ballistics don't match the scene. More disturbing are the specific wound patterns documented by the coroner. Bonnie Parker's autopsy reveals close-range shotgun wounds to her face and torso, with powder burns indicating the weapon was fired from less than 3 feet away. But the official ambush supposedly happened from position 75 feet or more away in the woods. How do you get contact wounds from a distant ambush? Then there's the missing time. The official report states the ambush occurred at 9:15 a.m., but the first authenticated photographs of the crime scene weren't taken until 11:20 a.m. That's a 2-hour gap with no official documentation of what happened to the bodies, the car, or the crime scene during that critical period. The death car itself presents another puzzle. When investigators compared the vehicle exhibited in traveling shows throughout 1935 with the crime scene photographs from 1934, they found different bullet hole patterns. Shell damage that appears in the photos is missing from the exhibited car, while the car shows damage not visible in the original crime scene images. Was this even the same vehicle? Perhaps most significantly, C.F. Boots Bailey, the mortician who prepared Bonnie and Clyde's bodies for burial, maintained complete silence about what he observed for 34 years. In a profession where confidentiality is paramount, why did he suddenly decide to speak publicly about the case in 1968? What had he seen that weighed on his conscience for over 3 decades? To understand why the truth might have been buried, consider what was really at stake that morning in Louisiana. Frank Hamer had built his reputation as the lawman who never failed to get his man. He'd come out of retirement specifically to hunt down Bonnie and Clyde, and failure would have permanently damaged his legendary status. The Louisiana officers had their own careers riding on this capture. Sheriff Jordan had promised his constituents he'd end the Barrow Gang's reign of terror. Texas authorities had been repeatedly embarrassed by Bonnie and Clyde's escapes over the previous 2 years. They needed a decisive victory, not a messy arrest that might end in another jailbreak or courtroom circus. The public wanted blood payment for 13 murders, particularly the killing of police officers. A trial would have given Bonnie and Clyde a platform to maintain their folk hero status. But what if the ambush didn't go according to plan? What if the initial barrage of gunfire wounded but didn't kill the couple? What if Bonnie and Clyde survived long enough to surrender, or worse, long enough to talk about police corruption and the real story behind their crime spree? The 2-hour window of missing time becomes crucial when you consider what might have needed to be arranged, cleaned up, or covered up before official photographs could be taken. The truth began emerging in 1968, when mortician C.F. Bailey finally broke his decades of silence. In a sworn statement, Bailey revealed that when Bonnie and Clyde's bodies arrived at his funeral home, they showed clear evidence of being moved and repositioned multiple times after death. The wound patterns, blood evidence, and rigor mortis indicators all suggested the couple had been pulled from the car and shot at close range while lying on the ground. Modern forensic analysis of the original crime scene photographs supports Bailey's account. Computer enhancement reveals that the bullet holes in the car were made by weapons firing from multiple positions, including shots fired directly beside and behind the vehicle. This would have been impossible if the ambush happened as claimed, with all 6 officers shooting from concealed positions in the woods. The mystery of the missing shell casings also becomes clear under this scenario. The 23-plus unrecovered casings were from execution shots fired during the missing 2 hours after the couple had been removed from the vehicle. These shells were systematically collected and disposed of by the officers to hide evidence of what really happened. Local residents interviewed years later reported hearing 2 distinct episodes of gunfire that morning, the initial sustained shooting around 9:15 a.m., followed by another shorter burst of gunfire around 11 a.m., just minutes before the official photographs were taken. Piecing together the forensic evidence with the witness accounts, here's what actually happened on that Louisiana back road. The ambush proceeded as planned, with the 6 officers opening fire on Bonnie and Clyde's car from the woods. But the couple wasn't killed instantly as reported. The initial barrage wounded both of them critically, but they remained alive when the shooting stopped. The officers approached the car to find Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow bleeding but conscious. Rather than provide medical attention or attempt arrests, they made a calculated decision. With their reputations and careers on the line, they couldn't risk the complications of wounded prisoners who might survive to stand trial. The couple was pulled from the vehicle and executed at close range with shotgun blasts and pistol shots. The scene was then carefully restaged. The bodies were repositioned inside the car to simulate death during the ambush. The execution ammunition was collected and disposed of. The crime scene was prepared for photography that would support the official narrative of instant death during justified use of lethal force. Only then, 2 hours after the actual ambush, were the famous photographs taken that would define this moment in American criminal history. Why was the truth buried for 34 years? The answer lies in the legal and political consequences the 6 officers would have faced if their actions became known. Executing wounded suspects, even cop killers, constituted murder under both Louisiana and Texas law. Frank Hamer's legendary status as America's greatest lawman would have been destroyed. The involved law enforcement agencies would have faced scandal, lawsuits, and federal investigation. So the physical evidence was manipulated, the timeline altered, and the story carefully shaped to show justified use of lethal force against dangerous criminals who died fighting. The missing shell casings were explained away as lost in the chaos. The wound patterns were attributed to the couple being thrown around inside the car during the shooting. The time gap was dismissed as necessary for securing the scene and notifying authorities. The real tragedy extends beyond the cover-up itself. Bonnie Parker, who according to FBI files never personally killed anyone during the gang's crime spree, was executed alongside Clyde not for her own crimes, but to eliminate a witness to what the officers had done. The young woman who'd written poetry about dying young became victim of the very violence she'd been swept into through her devotion to Clyde Barrow. What we now understand is that the iconic photographs showing Bonnie and Clyde in their final moments are actually staged crime scene images designed to hide an execution. The ambush that became one of law enforcement's most celebrated victories was built on a lie that lasted 34 years, until a mortician's conscience finally forced the truth into the light. The Bonnie and Clyde case demonstrates how easily historical narratives can be shaped by those in power, and how long it can take for forensic evidence to reveal what really happened. But speaking of missing evidence and manipulated crime scenes, you need to hear about the railroad worker who photographed 3 men in suits running from Dealey Plaza 60 seconds after the Kennedy assassination, and why the FBI confiscated his camera and destroyed the film. Here's what I want to know. If you were that mortician in 1934, would you have spoken up immediately when it mattered, or would you have waited 34 years when everyone involved was beyond prosecution? Let me know in the comments.